Okay, it's time to continue with the second part of chapter 4 of Henri Nouwen's Finding My Way Home, Pathways to Life and the Spirit. Before I do, I want to ask this day, which is April 3rd, 2020, friends at St. Matthew's Church here at Worcester to pray for Dick Field Sr., a gentleman from Sacred Heart Roman Catholic Parish in Lynn, Massachusetts, who died last night. He's the father-in-law of Donna Starbird Field, who grew up here at St. Matthew's. So please, as we think about the pathway of living and dying today with Henri Nouwen, do remember and pray for Dick, who was a great guy. So we continue. What is fruitfulness in this context? Relationships are a mystery. It's possible to have intimate relationships with loved ones who have died. Death sometimes deepens the intimacy. Let me illustrate. You, your father, and your mother are sharing around the kitchen table. It's probably quite ordinary, and you talk about the events of the day or the weather. But if you leave home for a while and travel to a foreign country, and you write your father and mother, you'll sometimes say things in your letters that were never said around the table. You might say, "Mom, I really love you. Dad, I think of you and I miss you a lot, and I wish you were here." These are the kinds of intimate expressions that you don't use when you are together. It's interesting that a little absence, a little distance, may allow you to experience intimacy in a relationship that you were not able to feel when you were physically together. Of course, dying is a much more radical leaving than taking a trip. I do believe, though, that after separation, certain people continue to be very significant for us in our hearts and through our memories. Remembering them is much more than just thinking of them, because we're making them part of our members, part of our whole being. Knowing this experience allows me to live from the deep belief that I have love to offer to people, not only here, but also beyond my short little life. I'm a human being who was loved by God before I was born, and whom God will love after I die. This brief lifetime is my opportunity to receive love, deepen love, grow in love, and give love. When I die, love continues to be active, and from full communion with God, I am present by love to those I leave behind. We are living in a culture that measures the value of the human person by degrees of success and productivity. What is your title? How much money do you make? How many friends do you have? What are your accomplishments? How busy are you? What do your children do? But it is important for us to remember that as we grow older, our ability to succeed in this way gradually diminishes. We lose our titles, our friends, our accomplishments, and our ability to do many things because we begin to feel weaker, more vulnerable, and more dependent. If we continue to look at ourselves from the point of view of success, our condition is not a good one. Because of our strong cultural vision, it's a huge challenge to look at vulnerability not as a negative thing, but as a positive thing. Do we dare to look at weakness as an opportunity to become fruitful? Fruitfulness in the spiritual life is about love, and this fruitfulness is very different from success or productivity. It's interesting to remember that fruits are always the result of vulnerability. A child is conceived when two people are vulnerable to each other in their intimacy. The experience of peace and reconciliation comes when people are very honest and compassionate with one another, when they are vulnerable and open about their mistakes and weaknesses. The seed that falls into broken ground bears much fruit. So perhaps it's wise to begin to shift our thinking. We want to move away from emulating success and begin to dream about a life of fruitfulness. When he was dying on the cross, Jesus was ultimately vulnerable. He had nothing left. Everything had been taken from him, including his dignity. And in the eyes of his culture, he was a failure. But in all truth, the moment of his death on the cross was his life's greatest moment, because there his life became the most fruitful one in all history. Jesus saw his life and his death as fruitful. It is good for you that I go. I will send you my Spirit. Our weakness and old age call people to surround us and support us. By not resisting weakness and by gratefully receiving another's care, we call forth community and provide our caregivers an opportunity to give their own gifts of compassion, care, love, and service. As we are given into their hands, others are blessed and enriched by caring for us. Our weakness bears fruit in their lives. And dying is our ultimate vulnerability. Instead of looking at the weakness of old age as simply the experience of loss after loss, we can choose it as a passage to emptiness, where our hearts have room to be filled with the spirit of love overflowing. It is ultimate weakness, but it is also potentially the greatest moment of our fruitfulness. Fear of death. Fear in the face of death is natural because death is a mystery. The fear of death resides in me, but I want to approach my death with fear being less dominant. Scripture says that the opposite of fear is love. Perfect love casts out fear. Believing this word, I grapple with fear and direct my life's energies toward loving God, others, and myself more deeply. The truth is that, like Jesus, most of us choose to give our lives and our deaths for others. We try to live so that others may be blessed by our lives and our deaths. We trust that life and death are not about fate or destiny. We then say with Jesus, "It is good for you that I go." This way of living minimizes the fear of dying. I have many friends who have died beautifully. They said, "I'm going to die. I've had a beautiful life, and I'm grateful. I give myself over to God, and I want you to remember me." When someone I love dies that way, I can really grieve and celebrate because the memory of my friend is such a gift of grace to me. I must add that I do believe that what I'm saying here is almost impossible to do alone. We need friends around us who believe that this is true. In my community, 4 people died in the last few years. Helen was ill for a long time, but there was someone with her day and night, and she was not alone when she died. Lloyd died rather unexpectedly, but we had a few days during which we surrounded him. When he died, there was a lot of grief and pain, mingled with the strength that comes from being with one another through it all. As this dear brother called us around him in death, we reminded him, "We are with you. Don't be afraid. God is calling you home, but you will always be part of our ongoing life." So the fear of death is not something we handle well on our own. We need other people around us whispering in our ears, "Don't be afraid to die, because even when you die, you will stay with us in a very deep way." Learning to remember the dead. Before he died, Jesus said to his disciples, "Stay together, pray, and wait for the Spirit to come." They didn't really understand what he was saying, and besides, because of his death, they were in deep grief. They needed to question what had happened and who was to blame. They needed time to cry, to go over past events, and to miss their friend and leader, Jesus. They needed to feel his absence and to want desperately to have him back. Only after time, and when they finally could say, "Yes, he's really gone," could they receive his presence in another way. So too for us when someone we love dies. It belongs to the call of all Christians to let people really die, not just in the sense of burying them, but to let die our experience of their physical presence, to let them die within us. That journey through grief may take years. We expect her or look for her. We want him back. We search for the meaning of her death. With the passing of a full year, Christmas comes and he's absent. Easter comes and we know she won't be here. His birthday, our wedding anniversary, and with the arrival of every other important date of the year, we feel afresh the incredible absence. We gradually accept that she's not on another trip or on her vacation. We hear or read something we want to share with him, and then we suddenly remember that he's not coming back. She is gone for good, always, absolutely gone. After a time, we may begin to feel that we've done the work of grieving when, unexpectedly, something reminds us again of our loss, and we're suddenly plunged into sadness all over again. That's because the person we have loved is in us, part of our soul, part of our interior life, and the letting go is enormously painful. This is why it takes a long time to let someone we love die completely. Ever so slowly, as these events pass one by one, we begin to know and accept that the relationship as we knew it is irrevocably gone. And as we allow the dead to be gone from our lives, they gently begin to take on another new life within us and within our memories. We still miss them, but we somehow choose life without them physically present to us, and we revive with a new vision, new energy, and new strength. I witnessed this transformation in my own father when my mother died in 1978. He mourned her loss deeply. They were companions and they had lived together for many, many years. Her death changed everything for my father, and he had to adapt to a whole new life without her. But with time, he eventually began to live something new, holding her memory, but not clinging to it in a false way. He was able to acknowledge that he had a beautiful life and a beautiful family with her, but he had to let her go. And as he did, there seemed to be a new joy in him, a new freedom, a new maturity. I've also known many people who could not seem to let go of their grief. They may have felt unfaithful or guilty to find new life as a widow or a widower. This is false piety. Death, our own or that of loved ones, is not our worst enemy. Jesus came to show us about life and death, and Jesus speaks of his death not as a failure, but as an opportunity to send his Spirit. If we keep our eyes on Jesus and if we carefully read the Gospels, we begin to see that new life is sent to us after the death of a loved one. It doesn't mean, of course, that death is wonderful and there's no grief or pain. Death in itself is not wonderful, it's terrible. But how we see our death and the death of others we know and love can be transforming. It takes time, but it's possible. My mother died, many of my classmates died, and a number of very close friends died in recent years. I remember each of them, not in a morbid way, but as having finally reached their true home. Meanwhile, I'm still on the way home. Those who have died live on in me and inspire me with their example and the rich legacy of love from their earthly lives. Their lives touch mine. Their lives make a difference in mine. Unfortunately, there isn't much recognition of the spiritual significance of a loved one's death because our culture would have us deal with our grief by going on as though nothing significant had happened. Love transforms our death or another's from nightmare to gift. As part of a family or community, we make the dead part of our members so as to receive the gift of their spirits. Loved ones who have died are remembered in worship, in prayers, in conversations, with photographs, and by visiting their graves. Life does go on, but with their remembrance enriching our hearts. Befriending death. Intuitively, I feel that when someone is dying young, in their 20s or 30s, their span of life has been too brief to grasp how special they are and how fruitful their short life is. I sometimes witness this with friends suffering from AIDS who are suddenly brought face to face with the mystery of the radical finality of death. They are easily overwhelmed with grief and anger. I feel deeply for them, and I also grieve because they do not comprehend or appreciate their abundant fruitfulness. I realize that these youthful brothers and sisters have a great challenge to befriend death. Because I have lived many years, there is for me an option about preparing to die. I know that I have no choice about how long I will live, but I do have a decision about how to live, and a choice about how I will face my aging, and about how I will live my exodus. I may be bedridden, and that will be totally out of my control, but with my faculties, I choose now the way I will live my declining years. After my accident a few years ago, and after my experience of peace with regard to my death, I felt very open and free to welcome and spend time with those who came to visit. One of the most startling things for me about those visits was the number of people who said to me, "Henri, you are a much better pastor when you are sick than when you're healthy. Finally, you are taking time to listen. You're not so preoccupied. You're not hurrying crazily from one thing to another. And you're much more lighthearted. What you say now is so helpful. We really enjoy the visits." At 63, I'm very aware that for me, it's just a question of years, a few years. And so I sense that my aging is a time for me to be thinking of my passage to more abundant life. I want to become grateful that my life will come to completion and to anticipate sending my spirit of love to all those I cherish. I feel the need to talk about my death not morbidly, but openly, and to invite my community, my family, and my friends to be with me on the path to the end of my earthly life. I want to befriend my death. Conclusion. God is spirit and the source of all love. Our spiritual journey calls us to seek and find this living God of love in prayer, worship, spiritual reading, spiritual mentoring, compassionate service to the poor, and good friends. Let us claim the truth that we are loved and open our hearts to receive God's overflowing love poured out for us. And living fully each day, let us share that love in all our wonderful and difficult relationships, responsibilities, and passages. The seeds of death are at work in us, but love is stronger than death. Your death and mine is our final passage, our exodus to the full realization of our identity as God's beloved children and to full communion with the God of love. Jesus walked the path ahead of us and invites us to choose the same path during our lifetime. He calls to us, "Follow me." He assures us, "Do not be afraid." This is our faith. Thanks for joining me in the reading of Henri Nouwen's Finding My Way Home, Pathways to Life and the Spirit. We heard together over these days about several paths that Nouwen identified as ways to life and to a life open to the Spirit of God. The path of power, the path of peace, the path of waiting, and finally the path of living and dying. Many of you may have seen images of Nouwen through the years. In the book here, there's a photograph of him, which I'll share for those of you who may not know him, so you can see the face, which says to us so much of the man who wrote these words. I should say, too, that on YouTube, online, much of his preaching and his giving of conferences through the years is available if you simply search for Henri Nouwen, Henri Nouwen. And there is his image there. He had a lot of internal struggle, as most of us do in one way or another, a lot of internal pain at times. But externally, there always was that smile. God bless you and see you soon.